Week 3 of the Division One VALORANT isn't about potential anymore. The learning curve is gone, the mistakes are costly, and the standings are starting to take shape. For teams chasing the top, there's no more safety net. Every clutch, every round, every map matters. And tonight, we dive into who's thriving under these pressures or who's falling behind, and why in VALORANT there are no second chances. I'm Infernosis, joined here by Angel and joined here by NerdsCasts. We are super excited to get this episode of Tilt Proof underway. We've had quite a bit of an interesting set of weeks so far, and actually a little upsets and very close calls across the board, haven't we?
We have. I'm not gonna lie, I was really surprised by Boise State when they came out and they just got a 2-0 against Ohio State off rip. That was the thing that I caught my eye and I'm like, we talked about it last Tilt Proof, but we didn't expect it until a bit later in the season. And the fact that they stepped up to the plate now and the implications of that, we'll obviously get more into that. But that's the big jarring first thing that comes to mind, Scott. But Ancient Angel.
I think that a lot of our preconceived notions about the way that this season is going to work coming into like week 0 and then even week 1, I think a lot of that is really starting to kind of crumble. And I think we're going to get a lot of narratives reshaped over the next couple of weeks. And I think this week was very key to that.
All right, well, speaking of this week, let's recap what actually went down this week. First up was Boise State versus Ohio State that happened off stream, a result that not many of us were anticipating. Come our last Tilt Proof podcast, we spoke in depth about this potential matchup and how this is going to fare out for that bottom 4, bottom 5 of the entire season and how they would fare. A bit of an upset. You want to talk about this one, NerdsCast?
I mean, off rip, I should have never doubted Marshall. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should never doubted Daimyo. But realistically, without being embellishing it too much, we expected Dez, who was a star player for Ohio State previously, to step up to the plate. And just looking at the some of the head-to-heads, just looking at Dez's stats individually, they were not as stellar of a performance as we saw, right? It's 26-31 KD on the maps. It was 2-0, so it was very dominant for Boise in terms of just the map score. Individually, the scores, I was looking just generally at some of the statistics for the each individual map. Abyss was 13-3 and Lotus was 13-6. So the differential in terms of maps, the delta is not even there. Like usually when it's a close match, the differential needs to be about 4 to 3 rounds in my mind. Even most of the time, that's generally what I would say is close. 13-10, 13-9. Even if you're getting into the 8 territory, I'd say it's nice. But the fact that they only got 6 on Lotus, by them I mean Ohio State, shows that Boise State really came and started to just shape up so fast, so quickly. And it makes me a little surprised. They were also running a double duelist comp for both sides on Lotus when it comes down to it. And Dez was on that waylay. So you'd expect, you have that back out potential. You have that utility to slow and have the pace be controlled by you, the star duelist. But you're going 15-15. You're going just barely even and near the bottom of the board in comparison to some of the other players on the enemy team. It's just a bit rough and shows how Boise State really stepped up.
So a battle between the question of dominant duelists, right? Is Dez going to step up and perform in the way that they did as not only our stat leader ending week 1, right? But to be able to perform up to that same level and prove they can continue that going through week 2. Unfortunately, looks like Sky's got the better end of that alongside Master and turned into a Boise State powerhouse in a 2-0 route. Turn that over to now Ancient Angel. We talk a little bit about Utah and Winthrop in this one. Kind of went as expected, but still a lot out of Utah, right?
Map 1 is not really much to talk about. Like it was 13-2, right? That's what we expected when we were talking about this match last week. Was Winthrop was going to be kind of heavy favorites. Ascent, though, I mean, there's kind of 2 ways you can look at Ascent, and it kind of hurts to talk about it this way, but it just feels like it is the case that Ascent was 13-6, which to a lot of people, that's great, right? That's considerably better than 13-2. At the very least, it becomes not nearly as much of a stomp, and it's more of just a strong win for Winthrop. But a lot of the problems that Utah had against Ohio State last week when Dez was farming, those same problems showed up again this week. And that was against a team like Winthrop where there's no weak links. I think something with the Boise Ohio State game, which was super, super kind of underrepresented from last week, was that we were very wrong about Boise coming into the season. And so the fact that they can come out now and put up this performance against Ohio State is, I think, more of a testament to a different team of Stony Brook, which we'll talk more about them later. But for this Utah Winthrop game, I mean, it was Winthrop all the way and nothing more.
I was like raising my hand. I'm waiting for my turn because I went back. Not only did I watch part of it live, but I went back and VOD reviewed a little bit of the match because the rounds that were picked up by Utah on the Ascent matchup were, one, on the defense, which means that realistically the favored side, and two, they had a lot of really good ideas on Lotus. It just was very easily read into because they're good ideas, but they didn't have like, it's like a macro game plan that wasn't successfully done individually. Like one of my favorite rounds was, I think it was like round 8 or 7 on Lotus, where they had a Nightfall Omen combo, but instead of like getting any early in contact or info or even trying to like think about how Winthrop could ante it, they just kind of sent it out pretty early into the retake exec on the A site, and then they just anteed it. They just waited in tree. By Winthrop, right? Winthrop University just waited in tree. And by the time University of Utah got all the util out, Moobs was already up towards heaven, takes the players down, and then you have no way to re-enter onto the sites. There's a lot of that throughout Lotus. And then Ascent, they were on defense, so it's a little easier. That's my little 2-cent spiel about the Winthrop game. Because I like when teams like Utah, I like giving them praise. Like, yes, you had good ideas. It was just maybe VOD review, like watching how Winthrop kind of counters those ideas.
So there was 2-0 starts to week 2, right? So we've got a precedent set. We have one more 2-0 to talk about. That's Maryville versus St. Clair College. And this was one that we hyped up a lot going into, Tilt Proof last episode, and saying this is going to be a really good matchup. St. Clair had a really masterful show against West Virginia. How are they going to fare now against Maryville? Well, they look to struggle quite a bit. And I'm sure you have a lot to talk about for this, Ancient Angel, but this was not the St. Clair College that we were expecting to see through this series, and the result panned out for them.
No, and it's something that we talked about, or at least I mentioned last week, was Maryville beat Winthrop in week 1. So in theory, Winthrop, we ranked as, team 1A, 1B right next to Maryville in terms of power rankings, if you want to call it that. St. Clair is what we thought was a step under that. We thought they were, that third best team, maybe could push for second. So coming into it, if Maryville beat Winthrop, they should have beat St. Clair by a significantly wide margin, or like by an easy margin, right? Maybe like 13-7s, 13-6s. This was Maryville taking a victory lap after map 1. I mean, that was a masterfully done map 1 by Maryville. And it started to expose some of the things that we had as question marks. We talked about JP and the Cumberland style of play. And this was a Maryville that read into that and was playing around that very well. And they knew you don't just walk around against St. Clair. They can counter that. You need to play deliberately. And I think the fact that Maryville was willing to do that against this team, a team that they were heavily favored against, I think showed.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very good matchup overall, but it just was Maryville showing up to the ballpark. They hit a home run, and St. Clair College did not figure out how to round the bases entirely, right? It's something that they've done before. They just need to work on maybe what that style Maryville brings, or maybe what more comes to the table. Then it's West Virginia versus Stony Brook. And this was a game that we said, hey, Stony Brook is a team that are stepping up. Maryville and hyped them up in their post-game interview at the end of week 1 in their Winthrop game that they won, that series that they won 2-1. You turn this over and say, hey, Stony Brook can beat nearly anybody. This is West Virginia that's placed in CVAL South, first place. They've beaten ridiculously solid teams. They can face off against Winthrop and Maryville, those top two, that A and B that you were highlighting just a moment ago, Ancient Angel. How is this game going to pan out? And it went to all 3 maps. The only series this entire weekend that went to all 3 maps. And the first 2 were gorgeous displays of execution for both sides. West Virginia, dominant fashion on map 3. Wasn't as much of a contest. Stony Brook didn't look as prepared for a map like Corrode, something that they will most definitely be working on and bringing into their, their repertoire, because it's just a map that it looks like these teams at the highest level are looking to want to tease and play. Highlight week 1, where we saw that for both Winthrop and for Maryville. You're saying, hey, West Virginia want to bring that into their back pockets. We got to start doing that too, because we want to stand, we want to fight, we want to be able to throw fists at that level level with those teams. Is there anything y'all saw like in particular that maybe went wrong across those first few maps, or maybe more specifically the final map? I think Nerds said that you had VOD reviewed it right a little bit towards the end there. I have to say the first two look like as close of an affair could get between these two rosters. The third one, Stony Brook, showed a lot to improve, but I have to say Yearn, by far the standout player for the entire series, especially on map 3. The Waylay was dominating, and it's something we saw this entire weekend.
Just to add credit to Yearn, I mean, he was a guy that blew us away in that week 1 game that West Virginia played against St. Clair. I mean, we were really, really impressed by Yearn as this kind of unknown quantity coming into the season, right? He's a freshman. You know, when we were talking about players on this West Virginia team, we were thinking about people like Gucci. We were thinking about people like Excite. And then to see Yearn come into this team, take that very, very important Sentinel role, and just thrive on it was beautiful. And on the other side for Stony Brook, I mean, again, even after last week, this is still like my pick for a dark horse team, especially considering coming into the season, this was a team that was, you know, outside of the quote unquote big four, right? The big four being Maryville, Winthrop, St. Clair, West Virginia. This is a team that's outside of that. They're trying to make names for themselves, and they do it amazingly. Taking a map here, it's the best thing that could have happened for them outside of a win. Also, so much more for the rest of the season. Like my stocks on Stony Brook right now are very, very high. Like, start buying.
That's okay. I said this at the beginning. My dark horse is the Broncos. I've said this before. So if we're talking about dark horses, I'm gonna stick to that one. But I see what you mean about Stony Brook. One thing I did VOD review and I wanted to talk about was actually the game I casted for Maryville. The thing that Maryville University has, I think, that is one of the strongest things that I want some other teams to bring in is throughout this league is VOD reviewing the games, right? Because you have the tape. I think when I actually was lucky enough to cast both, I think, of the St. Clair matches that were played out. And I think Maryville probably saw it because when they picked into Sunset, not only did they dominate on the defensive side, but when the attack side came, they really knew what Instinct was going to be doing in mid control, and they just dominated that. As for the West Virginia matchup, along with Stony Brook, there was a lot of growth out of them, and the fact that they even got to take a map off, and in the manner that they did, was hype. It was impressive. Huge props to them.
Stony Brook, get a better map pool, and then and then they're actually like a top 2 team. I swear.
I think it's almost frustrating to watch, you know, scenarios like that play out. We have a really solid first 2 maps, and the third one can kind of go wrong. But that just get it out in the beginning of the season, right? That's just the time to do it. Burn it out in the beginning of the season. You've now learned that you need to add this into your back pocket, and you have infinite room for growth. This is like the big talk we've had about those bottom 4, but I think we go ahead and check out our standings. We'll move on into our next section. It's not the bottom 4. It's the bottom 7. Every single team has managed to pack themselves a win. Every single team, bar Maryville, has had one single loss. And because we had those, I would say, upset wins or upset losses, right, for teams that were not expected to lose, or maybe they were like, hey, this was going to be a close call, I think it was going to go down, bar Utah here, because they did lose there too, but I really like their week 1, so I count it as a mini win for them in spirit. This is like the shocker for us, right? And it's important to highlight what this means for the future. And AncientAngel, it's going to mean a lot because these teams have to survive and surpass that, you know, 50% win rate. They've got to catch up to Maryville, because if they give Maryville too much of a lead, and Maryville's already faced some tough opponents already, right? It's going to be hard to give them losses to knock them down a peg.
The one thing that I'll say in terms of what the kind of state of things looks like right now is it's very, very interesting that we kind of talk about the separation of the top 4 teams and the bottom 4 teams, because the top 4, they've basically, everyone's played another team in the top 4 already. Like, Maryville's played St. Clair. St. Clair has played both West Virginia and Maryville. Winthrop played Maryville. So really what this is about now for Winthrop, West Virginia, and St. Clair is keeping things clean amongst the teams that we expect things to be clean from. For West Virginia, when you play the Ohio States, the Utahs, are you keeping things clean, and are you getting those 2-0 wins? So that way you're putting yourself in not only a good position standing wise, but also momentum wise going into those fall playoffs. And, you know, for these teams like the Stony Brooks, like Boise, what do you start to look like against the quote unquote big 4? Is, are you picking up maps consistently? Are you finding yourself comfortably in that top 6 position? Or are you having to fight things out against Utah? Are you having to fight things out against the Ohio State? So,
Nerds, you got nothing?
Broncos, man. I want to see.
You're totally in the right. This was a team that was like
we didn't expect them to do as well as they did, and the fact that we talked about it, right? It's not gonna be. It's not the bottom 7. You're talking about AncientAngel at the beginning of that entire segment talked about how we want to keep the top teams up in arms. For me, one of the things that I find the most like fascinating and that I would really like to see is some of the lower teams challenging them, because I don't think we've seen. I mean, Boise State is inevitably going to fight the Winthrops, the Maryvilles. They're going to have those hard matchups. In those matchups, I want to see them just improving generally. But then, how are those lower teams going to improve throughout the season? Because I'm always about that underdog storyline. Is Stony Brook going to be the dark horse and challenge for the 4th and 3rd seed? Is it going to be Boise State? And I feel like that'll be the most interesting part. So I just want to throw that in there, because both it's one a little funny, like W for the vibes, for the aura, but on a very analytical note, it's like they picked up a match, they managed to win out in the manner that they did so. Gosh, I wish I could VOD review that map. I want to see them next week when we do get those games. How and what changes did they do? Because if they changed up potentially their core structure or throughout the season they developed, and this goes for Stony and for Boise State, it's solid. It's great. They're adapting. That's kind of what the point of this league was for.
So this brings us over to our next segment, our stats breakdown, and a little bit of our checks for our leaders and some things that stand out to us. And the big one, you mentioned Boise State, so let's touch on the big one here for Boise State, a 78% attacking win percentage. So yes, we do wish we would have seen this. We wish we would have seen how effective this offense can truly be, but this now clues us into the potential for Boise State, right? They are a coil that's waiting to be sprung, right? This inertia, this momentum, can this coil continue to unfurl in the direction for these other teams, or is this just a week 2 moment for them? It's just the week 2 scenario. It can't be, right? It has to be a sign of things to come. I mean, you outdo Winthrop 62%, right? You do outdo Maryville's 53%. Boise State is by and far in the lead in attacking round percentage. So that is a team to look at for attactive effectiveness, and we need to see that continuing going through week 4 and beyond, or week 3 and beyond. But you also have all these other stat leaders. AncientAngel, I know we touched on a couple of these players before, but there are some huge outliers here.
Yeah, and I think one of the big ones, especially for this week, is it's going to be Infiltrator, right? Someone who has come into things and just, we talk about him being potentially the best collegiate player, point blank, period. And he really started to show it this week. I think after a pretty rough week 1 out of Winthrop against Maryville, a game that we were expecting to be significantly closer than it was, or even Winthrop taking it over Maryville. The fact that Infiltrator came into this week 2 and just dominated, just plain out, just looked like the best guy in the server, the best player you could put on a fantasy team. And it's why I'm not too low on the Winthrop stocks either. It's why I'm still trying to give them their praises, because that was a very clean win, and it was with the system that they always rely on, which is let's support Infiltrator. We run our attacks and our attacking rounds through Infiltrator, like you said. I think the difference was that a lot of those rounds for Utah this week, they came on that Ascent defense, and so it was just those small moments that ended up knocking them down a couple pegs, and why Boise State was able to lead on the offense this week. But that's still good looks for Boise State. And I think it should be mentioned next week. They're going up against West Virginia. I think that's, still a match where we're expecting West Virginia to take the win, but there's an absolute possibility of Boise State coming away with a map, of a 13-8, of a 13-9 scenario. And if you're Boise State, any round win is going to be growth, and growth is what we're looking for right now.
Nerds,
you want to mention Nerds? You want to
just
mention your goat, your personal goat, who's leading in the KD ratio? Is that what you want to mention?
I was gonna say, I was sitting here, I was at the tip of my tongue, and I was like, wait a minute, I can't be having favoritism, but I think I can't have favoritism. but I think I've been hammering it home so often. And then I see the stats and I'm like, wait a minute, Wildfire is up there. My goat, my Ukrainian goat. But I'll say that. But the thing I do want to say, actually, more than that, is if we're talking about Winstrup's system, it's called a system for a reason, because Glyph is up there, right? As alongside his teammates, right? Infiltrator's there, but so is Glyph, and so is the rest of the team at 1.65 in terms of just individual kill death ratio, right? So when you look at like, and in terms of like ACS, I think Glyph is literally second. It says 258 on our stat sheet here. So it's like when you have two players who are playing like that, you have your aggro Smokes, who mainly plays Omen. In some cases, it's like Omen, Astro, Viper map pool, so lurking play style, anchoring in some cases. That really lends itself for a successful team, because I think like in a lot of sports like this, and especially within Valorant, you have an anchor on the site, and then you have the other person who's kind of able to take aggro and take space, that infiltrator on the defense, to really go for stuff like that. That's why I really enjoyed a Maryville system back in like the, when we saw them playing here, I think like this in last week, is that they generally have that system where if someone is going to be anchoring on the site, they are still going to be poking and prodding on the defense. And on the attack side, same thing. If they do go for a nice hit onto a site where they have some set plays, it works really well. But stats wise, I always got to give it to Wildfire. Wildfire has really been consistent in terms of finding value with a lot of the utility that they tend to send out. And that's really been the reason why I always give hype to Wildfire, because it's easy to hype up a good player.
Speaking of fire, I'll have two more stats before we jump on over towards our next segment. The one I want to touch on first will be, I mentioned Boise State 78% attacking win percentage, but we didn't touch on their post-plant win percentage, right? Which was still exceptionally high. Second place overall, 85%. But you'd expect that. If you have an attacking win percentage that's already high, you'd expect your post-plants to be pretty darn good, right? So where is it on the reversal for Maryville? They've got an 89% post-plant win percentage, but they have not really had as much of a need to plant that spike down in some of their matchups, apparently, because they've only got that 53% attacker win percentage. So it seems like a huge win condition for this Maryville roster is to get in there and get the spike down. And if they fail on doing so, which apparently is somewhere around 40% of the time, it turns into a problem for them and could lead them to needing to get defensive round wins instead. So keep an eye on that going into the continuing weeks, see if that stat gets out of hand or if it starts to come back in a little bit. They have had arguably a really tough set of these first two matches, so that could be a problem for them. But then we talk about those kill leaders in the kill department. Urine with 91 kills, outdoing Dez, who was at 89, and that brings over to the next point for West Virginia University. They had 386 kills in total, and they were facing Stony Brook that had 355 by the end of these stats. They are our slugfest teams, and that back and forth nature, guess what, panned perfectly into our next segment, this matchup of Stony Brook versus West Virginia, where it was Haven 13-8 going to West Virginia, Lotus 13-7 for Stony Brook. Go over to Corrode, where it got a little bit out of hand, and Urine really padded the stats because they just didn't find a great way to counteract that double duelist setup with the Waylay. No matter the case, this was a absolute battle between those first two, and it really sets kind of this big question in the air about what goes on in the future, AncientAngel.
I think there's two sides to this, right? Because in theory, you're trying to say, okay, well, what's more important? Is it the win or the loss?
Yeah.
I think it's both. I think they're equally as important. And the first thing that you have to remember is the fact that West Virginia started out losing to St. Clair in 2, mind you, right? So technically, when you're talking about like the win-loss for maps, West Virginia is still on the negative, right? They've lost 3 maps. They've only won 2 in these first 2 weeks. It just so happens that, the maps that they've been able to put together in terms of wins have been exceptionally good. And then, this map that they lost, this Lotus game wasn't the greatest, but it was also, or not late. The Lotus game, right?
Yeah.
Stony Brook ended up taking Lotus 13-7. Okay.
Yes.
I'm remembering that correctly. I'm not going crazy. But that Lotus, that didn't feel like a bad West Virginia map. That just felt like a really good Stony Brook map. And so then, we talk about week 1 and we talked a little bit about that for West Virginia. It was still a close game, right? Map 2 was like double overtime and St. Clair was able to pull it out by the skin of their teeth. And on the other side, Stony Brook lost after what was an impressive opening for them in week 1, but again, this is what we expected, and if anything, what we wanted out of Stony Brook.
I kind of said this a little bit when it was first brought up, but the third map being Corrode just makes it feel like they just Stony Brook need a little bit more time on it, right? They're running Chamber, Neon, Fade, Vise, Omen, which is a great comp. That's not really a bad composition, but it just seems like they don't know exactly what they need to be doing with that composition, and that's where I truly got like nerdy into it, because I think this was you casted this Infernosis.
Yes.
I watched part of this map because I was like, ooh, it's 1-in-1. This is the one map that I did watch. I'm like, ooh, and then I saw how they played it. And I think for West Virginia, the reason that the meta so far has been the double duelist, the double dive, especially on maps like Corrode, is just because of the geometry of it. And if you have the chamber, you kind of need to be very proactive with how you utilize that stuff. So that's where it comes down to it. More than anything, also, it was just a couple of really unfortunate rounds, just to kind of add into the fact that Stony Brook is a really good team, right? West Virginia had picked up some really good rounds on, like, I think it was I forgot if it was the first half pistol or second half pistol, where it's like a 2v something, and the West Virginia managed to come back. I think it was like a 2v4, and they just brought it back, and it's like, that's a very uncontrollable factor. They played that somewhat well. They played really I think it was the first pistol, because they played aggressively, and then they played aggressively. They did well with the chamber, and then they kind of got stunted after that. So that's where my head is at for them.
There were a couple big moments, right, throughout Haven and throughout Lotus, where big rounds were given up off of little mistakes, 2vx scenarios, 1vx scenarios that are going the wrong way, right? And you kind of expect to see that in a Maryville or Winthrop game, where those teams are just that good. Any one player could shut down the 5 of looks like any other collegiate team, right? But in a series like this, with these teams that have proven that they can go back to back, the score lines through the first 2 maps prove that. Seeing it happen occasionally is like, okay, I see you, you're going to avoid to do that. I trust in you to do that. And you're going to go into this next week and get more versed, well, better prepared. You're going to now have that in your back pocket to say, I know, I'm in this scenario positionally. I now know where I can go and where I made a mistake before. You had a lot more of those, and those problems become even worse if you're a little bit less prepared in a map, or maybe not as experienced in a map. And that Corrode just makes it, that much more obvious. So this was a map, elsewhere, like Abyss, if you're not super solid on it, could obviously still have the same issue, but it would be a little bit less because you probably have more experience on that map than, say, a map like Corrode that is brand new to you. So consistency and a lack of predictability as well. And that's going to come into our meta discussion, is more specifically for a map like Corrode. And it comes down to that duelist choice of Waylay, and the duelist choice we saw for Dez as well on that Waylay that was mentioned earlier by Nerds. And since Nerds were so excited to talk about the meta, I'll let them take it away.
The reason that I was talking about the meta is that Waylay, the teams tend to run Waylay Yoru because it allows for like this nice mix of when you want to take fights and what speed you want to take them at. It also gives a lot of individuality for a lot of teams to take that space. And when I talked about like the reason like the Stony Brook comp on Corrode wasn't that big of an issue with Chamber, was because you can still get really active. You can still get active where you need to get active and take fights preemptively, and then just TP out, right? It still gives you that Waylay like run it back. But the reason Waylay is being picked more often is because if you just look at Waylay's utility, the ultimate is really good to combo with other ultimates. It's a giant slow. It literally slows you. The pocket slow that you have, as well as the dash and recall, are very good for one and gun fights. And then once you have that advantage, teams are always really good at winning 4v. Like you have 5v4, or even if you're in a 3v4 scenario, you're playing with numbers up. And a lot of these teams are very comfortable once they have the numbers advantage, because all they need to do is just trade off of each other. And even if you have one player left standing, you're winning round after round. And that's just why Waylay is being played more often.
I'm gonna add, because I want to bounce off of that, because I think that what Nerd said, very accurate to the very like the kind of double duelist, especially on Abyss, right? A map where it's very, very like kind of team fight focused, right? We're going to send all of our utility in onto a site, or we're going to send a lot of our utility mid and maybe only have like one lurker over towards each extremity. Like that's the way that Abyss likes to be played out most of the times on the attack. And I think that this kind of combo of the Yoru and the Waylay being able to do things together is really, really important or just individually in case one of them goes down early. And so I think that's why you saw it. If we're talking about off screen, off stream, the Boise State Ohio State matchup where they both ran the double duelist, the Yoru Waylay. I would have loved to see some of the strats that they ended up going with, especially Boise State, considering that was very, very dominant win for them. But on the other side of things, we talk about Waylay in some of these other comps. I don't necessarily know if there is enough to say, oh, we're going to be seeing a lot more Waylay in the future.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very, very map dependent, right? I think Abyss is the only one where I'm like really, really confident in saying that Waylay's good. Everything else, I think, is gonna start to fall off over time. Like, especially this Corrode Waylay, I wasn't that big of a fan of it.
So that brings up kind of I'll make a jab here real fast, or a joke, I should say. Let's say we had 6 Abyss maps across a weekend, and we're like, oh, there's an uptick in Astro play. Is Astro going to be the new controller meta, right? That's not the case. It's going to be super map dependent. That's what we're getting at here, right? Waylay is going to be good on these maps. We've talked a lot about why Waylay is going to be good on those maps, and it's going to come down to the players playing them. And Yearn went absolutely out of their mind, as you would expect, greatly assisted by the team to uplift them to do so. But that also brings up some increases in other agents we've seen, like that Chamber, and the importance in Sentinels across this last weekend, and the way that those players have been shining. Yearn shining through the first map, as well as a little bit through the second. Big Tonka Tony, aka Big Tonka T, Giza for Maryville. You had the Cypher and Chamber for them, and then you had moves for Winthrop, as you typically expect for this player anyways. The Sentinel play is so darn important to cement these teams. And if you can shut that down, and that was kind of my big point for St. Clair Saints, if you could shut down JP, or you shut down these individuals, you're going to find the team struggling. And that's exactly one of the reasons in my mind we saw St. Clair Saints kind of fall the way that they did. You did have, I'll have to recuse myself back up to the top here for their stats page. You did have one player going absolutely haywire for the St. Clair Saints. But unfortunately, the rest of the team was just sitting kind of central of the pack, and the stats just kind of went a bit too far out of control for the side of St. Clair Saints, and they had to reel it back in now for next week and hope that something gets a little bit better for them. But let's go ahead and jump on over to our Week 3 match previews and how these matches are going to go out. Let's talk about this first one, AncientAngel. It's Ohio State versus Winthrop.
Winthrop next.
All right.
It's Ohio State and Utah they occupy very similar spaces in my mind. And I think it's kind of funny because in week 1, that was the matchup where we were like, this is like a coin flip. This just feels like Ohio State just had Dez on a really, really good day. But I think this is a very similar case to what we talked about with Utah last week when they were scheduled to go up against Winthrop. I'm looking for 13-8s. I'm looking for decent finishes with these maps. I'm looking to not get blown out against a team like Winthrop, which is a bunch of firepower and a really solid game plan. If you can do that, if you can hold on, if you can gather some rounds together, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you have one player going nuclear, just do it. Just get these rounds across the line and show us just how deep you can get into your bag when it's time to get pushed to the limit.
Right, so let's jump over to Utah and St. Clair then. So the Saints coming into this one 1-1. Utah, unfortunately, have not been able to find themselves a victory just yet, despite how well we felt they performed in week 1. Nerds, how are you feeling about this matchup?
I was really gonna do it.
Do it.
St. Clair next.
Discussion.
I think St. Clair came off of a rough game. Maryville has been a tough team for them.
Yeah.
Utah is coming off of like 2 losses in a row. So I think that, again, there's going to be such a good chance here for Utah to really do a dent into St. Clair, right? Like, this is where we need to see Utah start to shine to some degree, right? They need to start bringing in some new ideas. I would like to see them VOD review, maybe take a page out of what Maryville did and how they played it against St. Clair's composition. If they can bring those new ideas, I think that's where it'll come through. But otherwise, St. Clair is definitely learning from that. They've been read into. They've just got their ideas kind of just like, wow. So if you kind of know how your opponents are going to play against you, and you know that your opponents are looking at you through the VODs here, they're watching the Division One streams, they're in the chat, you have to make sure that you're going to counter strat it.
All right, so we'll jump over to the next match to highlight West Virginia against Boise State. West Virginia, who wins out in map 3, didn't get their week 1 victory, still negative in map differential, as pointed out by AncientAngel. Let AncientAngel touch on this map, this series as a whole. And Boise State, who pulls off the week 2 win. How you feeling about this matchup?
I think this is going to be very interesting because both of these teams had kind of a rough week 1, right? For their own reasons, in their own matchups. I think the big thing for West Virginia is, do we see something like, do we continue to see like an upwards trajectory in a lot of the mid-round mistakes? Because what will happen, especially when you talk about like the St. Clair game, which is that's the week 1 loss, it's the thing that's holding them back from definitively being in that top 4 right now, is it was a lot of mid-round mistakes. They would have a really good start to the round, or they'd have a really solid plan going into the round, and then they would make one tiny mistake because they it almost looked like autopilot in a sense, where it's like, oh, we've done this in practice 4 million times before, or we've done this in official matches 4 million times before, we can do it again. And then JP went out and did JP things, right? And that's why we sung JP's praises in week 1. Well, now, after that, you don't have those necessarily when you're going against Stony Brook. You look better. So the question is, when it comes to this matchup against Boise State, is does Boise State do enough either on the firepower side or on the macro game plan anti-strat side of things to disrupt the West Virginia game plan? Because I don't think that Boise State can play the natural game that they want and sneak away with a win. I think it has to come through anti-stratting, or it has to come from figuring out a way for your individual players to, I guess, overcome the kind of overall herd game plan tactics of West Virginia.
So this touches on to what we're considering, I think, as a whole, our match of the week. Though I do think West Virginia and Boise State is like a tone-setting match of the week, right? It's a little bit different, but in terms of what we believe is going to be the true test, the medal test, in this week will be this Maryville versus Stony Brook series. This is Maryville, who straight up said in their week 1 interview saying, we think Stony Brook is a team that's slept on. We think they can contend. It's just going to depend on the day. They can be a threat to us and will be. Stony Brook now coming off of a loss, knowing that map this week will likely just ban it out. They're going to work on it hard. And I don't think it's going to be ready in just a single week against a team like Maryville, but they can work on it. They can ban it out, not have to worry about it in the first place, and then try to pick up those pieces elsewhere. I think they can get a map. It's a question of if they can get 2, but as long as they can shut down those really bad plays, like they were giving up those inconsistency rounds we talked about on map 1 and 2 in that series against West Virginia, I think they have a very solid shot against Maryville. How do y'all feel?
I'm going to give it to Stony Brook for one reason. What I want to see from them is they're teetering on this question of who's running what. They've started running a bit more double duelist with Aleb and Rookie going for the Yoru Jet Neon vibe. And I think that I want them to lean into that. It was something we talked about, the meta of having the double duelist. You don't need to run the Waylay. We're just talking about just generally the more aggressive style of composition that they have. And the fact that they've also swapped Majestic from Chamber to playing that secondary smoke and now being the main smoke. If it's working for them and that's like finding them more consistency, I think that'll be the vibe that they need to have. We will see if they can take off 2 maps. I doubt it. I think 1 map, and what Scott said earlier about, we've kind of been talking about the anti-stratting because we're getting deeper into the weeks and how that plays into it. But that's who I'm going to be looking for.
I don't mind that. However, I'm going to say this. I think Abel absolutely needs to show up because I think Abel's the best player on that team.
I can agree.
That being said, Abel shows up best when he's playing smokes. Don't run double duelist. I don't want to see it. Put Abel on the smokes. Put Abel on the smokes. If you want to run double smokes, that's fine. Throw Majestic on the Viper. If you want to run it, if Abel wants to run it, or the team just feels like it's better to run, fine. Abel's going to show up no matter what. The question is, who is it going to be next to Abel? Because I don't even necessarily think the pressure needs to be on Rookie. It's not about one player, because we already know the one player is Abel. We know that Abel's going to thrive wherever you put him in this Stony Brook system, or even if he's not at the top of the leaderboard, he's still going to be doing his job and doing his role at a very, very high level. It's about everyone else on Stony Brook, and it's about everyone else on Stony Brook leveling up to reach Abel.
For me in that series, it's going to come down to, and I'm fine if Abel plays double duelist, more specifically if it's like Haven and they want to do the Yoru again, because we've seen how good that can be. But it's a hard composition to do against a team like Maryville. You have to put some respect on that team, right? And look at who you're facing. So I see both your points. We'll have to now go into the pick'ems themselves. Let's look at Ohio State and Winthrop. We said the big one here. Can Dez backpack this team once again and put up a battle here against Winthrop? Or is Winthrop going to continue to go 2-1 and try to continue to catch up to that loss they had in week 1 against Maryville? What's your take, AncientAngel?
Winthrop, next.
All right. Nerds?
I gotta give it to Winthrop as well. They have a really dominant squad there. I do think Ohio will take a map. That's gonna be my hot take.
I think if Dez shows up 100%. But I also feel like when Dez is able to perform, the team can come up around Dez, which I think just needs to be able to happen even if Dez is getting targeted. So that's my view for Ohio State. It still unfortunately puts Winthrop in my eyes as taking that map. So it's a three talent series here saying that Winthrop will take that series. Let's jump it over to Utah and St. Clair. And again, a player that kind of got shut down the week before, that's JP. We talked about how important those Sentinels are. Is it going to matter in a series like with Utah, he was already 0-2? Or do we see Utah come out of the woodworks and perform like we saw them do in week 1 and actually have a really good series against St. Clair? I still think it goes St. Clair, but prove me wrong, Utah. They're my favorite team to watch performance-wise out of these first 2 weeks.
Wait, so you're going for St. Clair?
Yeah.
I'm going for Utah. And I think it's because of what you said. There's a lot that can be done in that squad. And I feel like St. Clair, they might slip. They slip a little bit more before they rise.
I'm so conflicted now because there was part of me deep down that I couldn't let St. Clair be a unanimous pick. Because I can't do that. I can't do this heartbreak again. But now they're not unanimous. I swear if I pick St. Clair and they lose to Utah, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm picking St. Clair. Please, St. Clair, please. I beg you, please.
Let's throw it into West Virginia and Boise State. This one was where we're saying it's the duos, it's the twos that matter, and this is going to be an offensive battle. West Virginia has the kill leader overall in the entirety of Division One right now, and in kills as a whole, not just as an individual like Yarn is. Can Boise State's offensive powerhouse and their prowess that we didn't get to witness this week overcome the difficulties of West Virginia? I think it has to go to West Virginia in my eyes because they've already taken down Stony Brook, who are already a kill-hungry team. If they could do that, I feel like they should be able to handle Boise State. So I give the nod to West Virginia.
Marshall, Zen, I predicted against you. Went out on Twitter. You said, not easy pick'ems. Never again. Boise State. I'll give it to the Bron. They were my dark horse team.
Well, they're blue.
I think it's
like a dark blue.
Yeah.
I'm colorblind though,
Exactly,
so I don't know
exactly. They're also literally, aren't they? Isn't their mascot literally a horse?
It's a horse, yeah, Charger.
Yeah. So
that's what I'm saying. It's a blue horse, not a dark horse.
It's a blue horse, bro.
Okay. Well, I think that this win against Stony Brook this week was a step in the right direction for West Virginia. I think they learned a lot in that game against St. Clair. West Virginia is also like my favorite team to watch play. Like you had that conversation with Utah. Yeah. And you think that Utah is like one of your favorite teams to watch play. I feel that way about West Virginia. Let me be biased a little bit. West Virginia, go ahead. Do your thing against Boise State. It might go 3 maps because I would be willing to concede that Boise State could take a map off West Virginia. I think that's completely possible. That being said, West Virginia all the way.
All right. So we got a 2-1 for talent predictions in favor of West Virginia for that third series. So then on to our final, this one being what we highlight as the match of the week, right, in terms of testing the mettle of these rosters, that being Maryville and Stony Brook. And I predicted Stony Brook last week, and I would like to be able to do so again. But Maryville have arguably gotten their toughest battle out of the way with Winthrop in week 1, and they proved themselves wholeheartedly. I think they're capable of doing it again. And then after this, it feels like smooth sailing in their potential schedule moving on, right? So I have to give the nod to Maryville, but I think Stony Brook takes a map, and I think they're going to the same problem where the potential of map 3, where their map pool can run a little dry, is where they're risking it.
I think, I echo your sentiments, Scott, but I also just, I think the calling's really well for them. I think I unironically think Maryville is one of the best collegiate teams that we have. And I think that they are going to do a decent amount of damage throughout this season. I do think Stony Brook will be able to pick up a map off of them just because that just tends to be the case. But I'm gonna go for Maryville. I mean, my choices are vibes mixed with logic is the way I like they work hand in hand. But logically, yes, Maryville.
See, I'm scared. I'm scared of this matchup. The only reason I'm going to pick Maryville, that's my official pick. The only reason is because I don't know if 1 week is enough time for Stony Brook to fix a lot of the holes in their map pool. And that's it. I think give Stony Brook like 3 more weeks. If they're going on the trajectory they're going on right now, I'm scared if I'm any other team because they look so fun to watch. And Abel also is insane. And we just haven't stressed it enough.
One of the reasons why I picked Utah as my favorite team to watch right now in Division One is because they have that much more room for growth than any other roster, right? But you look at Utah and go, they're a diamond in the rough. They just need to be, cleaned off and given a little bit of a spit shine, and then they'll be able to be, just as pretty on a gold band than any other ring out there, right? So I think it's almost the same thing with Stony Brook. But that leads us to our closing. No more second chances. Who is out in terms if they lose this week? Who has basically said, well, our top 3, our top 4 contention is almost out the window. It'll be nigh impossible to recover. So who cannot afford a mistake? What do y'all's takes?
Utah.
Let's hear it, Ancient. Oh, Utah? I mean,
I have to cut in here.
So.
Utah. That's why we're voting for Utah this week, baby. That's why I'm voting for Utah for this week, baby. Come on. Why do you? At first I was just wide, but I look like a U. But.
I mean, you're right. That I would have said the same thing. I can't
anything
lie.
They say, we just go on a serious note immediately afterwards. Because we know.
Actually, though, Boise State, the season starts to look a little scary after this West Virginia game.
Yeah.
So, like we said, even if it's not necessarily a win, you want to be picking up a map. Splitting the first 2 weeks in the fashion that you did. Going 1-1, not the greatest look, especially when you're talking about a top 6. Remember, playoffs for the fall is only 6. If you don't get top 6, you're not in playoffs. And right now, that's completely wide open. And so to start 2-1 down after going up against 2 of those teams that we're expecting to be in that 4 to 6 range is not the start you want to have.
So that is the question of which team can't afford mistakes. And we did talk about inconsistency more specifically for Stony Brook. So that's the team I'm looking at, right? They can't make those mistakes. But that's little mistakes in the game, not the whole mistake of losing out that series. That turns it over. Who needs the win the most, right? Who desperately needs the win? And I still think that goes to Stony Brook. Stony Brook needs a win against a top team because they couldn't get it done last week against West Virginia, which we said was a huge threat powerhouse team, top 4, even top 3. So I think Stony Brook desperately needs this win, if not just because if they get the win, it's against Maryville, who's our current number 1 undefeated, right? Against a team like Winthrop as well in week 1. I think Stony Brook, in my eyes, is the one that needs the win the most in week 3.
Yes.
I'm just saying. I don't know what we're worried about Boise State for, because they're worried.
I worry about every team. Anything can happen in collegiate esports, right?
I think that's I was gonna say that was gonna be a point. I was like, I think that's the beauty of this league is that because we've already seen some upsets that we're probably like next week we kind of know what to expect, but we also don't know what to expect. We have this idea, we have the picture frame, but we don't know the picture yet, and I think that's the beauty of it. As we fill in the beautiful painting that is the rest of this season.
The learning curve is gone. The mistakes are indeed costly, and there is no more worry about potential. The spring has been sprung. It's just a question of how much more gas is in the back of your pocket, how much is left in that tank, and can those teams that have had the tumultuous start to the season, going 1-1, going 0-2, right? Can they make the recovery? We'll have to see through the remainder. Tune in next week as well for more here from Tilt Proof. This has been this episode. We'll see you guys for the next one.